death on naturalism would be a cessation, a total cessation. I don't think very many people have taken that seriously. I love Socrates, um, but when he says death would be either going to heaven or having the best sleep ever, like what kind of what kind of death is that? Like, are you just going to be, rolling around in dreams? No, that's not what death would be. Like, does it give you feeling of hope? This kind of a continuity? Like, how does it make you feel? Like thinking like if I die, eventually it'll continue. The subjectiveness will continue. Okay, Chris, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, I was really happy that you agreed to do this, and especially because you do this as a profession. I understand you're a philosophy professor at a university.
Yes, yeah, I teach at Chula Vista Christian University.
Okay, and I read on your website that you're a former fighter pilot or a military pilot. Is that true?
Yeah, I flew not fighters, I flew refueling jets. So we did air-to-air refueling, KC-10 extender.
That's really cool. Because I myself I graduated from a flight academy recently, just a year ago, and I'm now applying to different airlines and
Wow.
find a job. Yeah,
Dude, that's awesome.
yeah.
Congrats.
Thank you, thank you. But yeah, I love that you share the same interest in this crazy idea. I just want to know how did you come to know about this GSC, and if you know more about Tom Clark and his sort of world view, because I understand that you come from a Christian perspective, whereas Tom Clark is a naturalist. So I
Mhm.
understand that there's some major differences in your approaches, you could say.
Sure, yeah. I had a viewer ask me if I wouldn't mind looking at the article. So I read it and it was very interesting to me. So I thought I'd take a look at it and just go through it with a fine-tooth comb and see what I thought about it. There was a lot that I thought was clever in it. So it piqued my interest enough to make a video out of it. So that's really where I came from. I hadn't heard of Tom Clark's stuff until then.
Okay, so I'm just gonna basically give a short outline of what Tom Clark's idea is. It's probably for the viewers difficult to understand if you haven't
Mhm.
read it before, but his basic conception is that there's something called a generic subjectivity, something that you and I have in common. Uh, it's and there is personal subjective continuity. This is, he explains through this observation that you never not exist from your own perspective. Like even if
Mhm.
you go under the knife, for instance, and you're unconscious for long periods of time, this period of unconsciousness is bridged instantaneously because you count down from 10 on the operating table, and the next moment you see the bright lights in the recovery room, and there's, of course, objectively speaking, a huge gap in between, but from the perspective of consciousness, it's the transition is seamless. Basically, there's only ever consciousness. So that's how he explains personal subjective continuity, and then he basically makes the jump to generic subjective continuity with this thought experiment where he says, well, imagine you're in the operating room and some future doctor changes certain parts of your brain so that you when you wake up you have a different personality. Maybe before you went under the knife you had a preference for chocolate ice cream. After waking up you have a preference for vanilla ice cream, and then at some point you change more and more. about yourself, you can't really claim, okay, this is now the same person, but still there's this underlying subjectivity that is the same between he calls it TC, Tom Clark, I'm guessing, and TC rad, so TC radically transformed. Um, so I tried to give a really quick outline, and I'm just curious to know, so where do you think this goes off the rails? Where's this yeah, not really
Mhm.
foolproof thinking?
Well, personally, I don't totally buy the thought experiment. I think when it comes to radically changing stuff like accidents about yourself, I don't think that changes who you are. I think that their personhood is constituted by more than that. So that's going to be some place where he and I are just going to disagree. Because he's going to just list off a bunch of stuff and say you are a collection of I assume if this is what his argument is, then he's going to have to say you are a collection of properties. And for me, I'm going to say that you're going to have some kind of essence, and that's going to be what you are. And then so I'm more of an Aristotelian. So I'm going to say you have a form, and the form is what makes you what you are. And then as long as you have that, you would have this personal subjective continuity. Um, and doesn't matter how radically you change the accidents that you have about you, those little properties about your tastes and all those things, you still would maintain personal subjective continuity. You wouldn't lose that because you would still be the same person. Um, I also think that I don't so he proceeds by sort of like an argument from vagueness, I think. Like it sounds like, like we're just taking many steps, many steps, many steps, many steps, and then you can't really tell the difference between one and the other. So there is no difference between one and the other. Um I personally have a deep suspicion of arguments from vagueness.
Mhm.
Um they Because I see so many places where their vagueness just doesn't seem to capture um, things in the real world. So, for example, when we talk about things like colors, colors seem real, but it's vague where the colors and I don't mean colors necessarily are real beyond just the phenomena of colors. I don't. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I'm not really making that claim just right now. But my claim is that even if it's vague where red starts and orange stops, they still seem real, even if there is this sort of vague boundary between the two of them. We're just not adept at identifying what that boundary is.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think the argument rests on the ability to draw this boundary. You can imagine the there are some elements of your personality are changed, and then I'm sure at some point you would agree, okay, this is no longer me. And then you would argue, okay, then the continuity has been broken. There is no longer any continuity between the person going under the knife and then the person waking up. Am I understanding you correctly? Because the essence of the person is uh, these different pieces of your personality, of your memories, of your desires. If for instance you are a former military pilot, if they took this memory out of your brain, uh,
Uh-huh.
this the person waking up would no longer really be you. This sort of, there would be no continuity. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I think is, and I may be wrong about this, but I think what he's claiming is that you can't tell the difference between these little changes between me you know, these little changes until you get to a point where someone is not me anymore. And I have a continuity before, a personal continuity. Therefore, I must have some kind of continuity even after I'm no longer me. Um, does that yeah, so it's like um
Well, the question is if there's a continuity between the person going under the knife and waking up, I
mhm.
think. Because what you and I agree on is that the person before and the person after, they definitely experience personal subjective continuity. I think you totally agree with this notion of personal subjective continuity. It
Yes,
doesn't have a
certainly.
problem with generic subjective continuity.
Yeah, and I do and I don't have a problem with it. I personally like there's a part of me that thinks that there's nothing controversial about it, and then there's a part of me that thinks that it goes too far. So here's what I mean by that. Um, the claim seems to be that there is no distinction there, or there is no, like you said, there is no break between of consciousness. There's no experience of non-consciousness.
Yeah,
So you have like a conscious experience, you may have a break and then another conscious experience, but there's no experience of that non-experience.
yeah.
So there is no gap in the consciousness. And that seems non-controversial to me. That means uncontroversial. Um, so in that sense, I think there's really no arguing with him, like that's just true, you know. Um, but to claim that it's a continuity, that I think is going a little too far because I think when you say that word continuity, you assume that there is something the same between the two that they share in between. And that I think is lacked in this case. I think just having an absence of a thing isn't sufficient to share something between a thing. So, and I give in the video an example, to have two universes that are spatiotemporally distinct. Um, there is no lack of spatiotemporal space between the two of them, and yet you wouldn't call them continuous universes. In the same way, um, I think that yeah, sure, there is no lack of conscious experience to distinguish me from a future person, but that wouldn't constitute a continuousness. That would just mean that there is no lack.
Okay, I understand what you mean. Um, it's an interesting objection, but I don't really see the analogy to these the spatio temporally distinct universes, uh,
Mm,
because uh, there is something that is continuous and that you and I, for instance, share in common, even though we have different identities.
mhm,
Um, we sh- we share consciousness. We both have this. We're in a state of being conscious, basically, and because that's interesting because that is also an objection I heard you give, namely that there would be GSC, subjective continuity, contemporaneously between people that, between us, for instance. We
mhm,
live during the same moment, different places at the same time. Um, and this somehow undermines GSC in your mind, but I don't think it does. He wants to argue based on GSC that after you are no longer here, uh, you will experience more consciousness. It's just in different contexts. So there is
mhm,
this forward-looking trajectory, but yes, there is something that you and I share in common as well, and it is this fact of being conscious, and that is
Mhm.
why there is a continuity um, between me, for instance, uh, and some person later on that comes to be in 100 years or so. There is this we share the state of being conscious, I think. I mean, what do you make of this thought?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that that objection that I gave was um it made sense only if he was not willing to countenance um this kind of like contemporaneous kind of continuity. But he may well actually be happy about that. He might think that, hey, look, we have this connection. Yeah, you're right. And so we are continuous with each other. So I think you're right. I do think though that on the space-time question, that the same thing could be said for the space-time universes. Um, like you said that we do have something that is in common, which is our consciousness. Well, the space-time universes have something in common, which is space-time.
Right, right. Um, I guess so. Yeah, I think I'm obligated to agree with that there's a continuity between these universes then. Yeah. But I don't see the contradiction, or I don't know. I mean, your argument is because there is no gap, that doesn't mean that there is necessarily a continuity. That is your argument,
Mhm.
basically.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's. I don't know. I don't have anything to say against that off the top of my head, but yeah, um, certainly something to think about. I don't know what Tom Clark would say to that.
Yeah. What do you think about the like does it give you um feeling of hope, this kind of a continuity? Like how does it make you feel like thinking like if I die eventually it'll continue, the subjectiveness will continue?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know, you mentioned this in your video too, and it doesn't. I don't think it can be the basis for any hope. I mean, I remember you said, like, what would you rather have, the promise of GSC, but you die right now,
Mhm.
or there's no GSC, but you get to live uh, until the end of your life, until old age. Um, Most people, I think, would take the latter, and myself included. But Tom Clark doesn't. I think he doesn't put this forward as a way to provide hope. It's not a substitution for the afterlife, for instance, or some kind of consolation for atheists. It's just he says something that you it is plausibly the case if you seriously consider this, what happens after you
Yeah.
die. And yeah, but I think that actually
uh
strengthens the argument, because uh, right, you wouldn't want to argue something is true just because it makes you feel good. I mean, that
right.
kind of weakens the argument. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Certainly. Yeah, and to be honest, like when I read the article, I thought for sure I saw somewhere in there where he thought he was claiming that this was something that we could look forward to in some sense. So that was like that was a separate thing that I was arguing about, not whether it's true or not. But yeah, you're right. Like if we are arguing that, hey, don't we want to believe this because it makes us feel good, then that's not that's not reality, right? Um, so yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I also like the fact that I think the fact that he takes it seriously, um, that death on naturalism would be a cessation, a total cessation. You know, I don't think very many people have taken that seriously. You know, I love Socrates, um, but when he says death would be either going to heaven or having the best sleep ever, having the best sleep ever, like what kind of what kind of death is that? Like, are you just going to be, rolling around in dreams? No, that's not what death would be if there was no afterlife. You know, that would, I think Clark does a great job of pressing the matter forward and giving multiple examples of guys like Tommy Nagel, I think was one of them. And there was like a lot of philosophers that uh he points out share this kind of um view of death as the we're hanging out in nothingness kind of view. Um so
Yeah,
I really appreciated that the clarity of thinking that he had in that article.
but I understand that you um, uh, entertain the thought that this might be a like kind of a coping mechanism, because the way I came to this idea of generic subjective continuity, it was presented on Sam Harris podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a very
Mhm.
prominent atheist, and he at the end of his podcast, he even says, like, I hope you found this interesting. And if nothing else, it provided you with some psychological, I think, psychological support. I think
Mm.
it's not the exact words, but yeah, so I understand. But this uh, kind of accusation that this might be wishful thinking, but this is something that Tom Clark definitely strongly rejects, that it has
Okay.
nothing to do with wishful thinking.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
But do you think I'm interested in your take on the what the mind is, and the basic the mind body problem, because and how is this informed by your religion? Is the soul, is the mind the soul? Is that the same thing? Because I understand that you're what one cannot take GSC on board if one believes in a soul, in like a in an essence that you
Mm.
have, uh, because then of course you and I don't share anything substantial in common, because your soul is unique, everyone's soul is unique. So is your understanding of of the soul, the Christian conception of the soul, informed, or does this inform your the way you think about this problem, and
Mhm.
GSC included?
You know, I would actually think that GSC would not come into conflict because I would think that it's different from personal subjective continuity. So that like because he's at pains to make clear that GSC is a very naturalistic um phenomenon, right? That there's no kind of mystical like connection that we have between each other. That this is just like a consciousness, a cessation of consciousness, another consciousness, and then there's just no experience of non-experience. Um, so as far as I could tell, that sounds like something I could get on board with as well, as long as we're not calling it a continuity. You know, like I just don't think that word applies. Um, but if I was wrong, and we should call it a continuity, then okay, then it's a continuity. And I my from my perspective, then I would see that, yeah, sure, we'd be continuous with each other in that way. But it wouldn't be like a mystical kind of continuousness. So I think I would still be able to have a personal subjective continuity that would be uh, a lot more robust, I guess, than the GSC would be. So my personal philosophy of mind is uh, very Aristotelian. I think I'm a hylomorphist. I think that that we are matter form composites, and that the form of things informs them, causes them to be the kinds of things that they are. And so our bodies are informed by a specific kind of form, which it would be the soul. We call it the soul because it's the kind of a thing that it is. And but I don't think I'm not a dualist in the Cartesian dualist sense, where I think that we're like ghosts in a shell. I don't think that. I think we're primarily embodied souls. So that when we talk about where do our ideas come from, I think that they come from our sense experiences. And when we talk about um, what is our natural state, I think that our natural state is as embodied creatures, and I think that this is actually what I am, and I'm not just using this thing that we call a body.
Mm.
Yeah.
This to me sounds kind of sounds of physicalism or materialism, because you say, okay, you're not a dualist. There's what we are is the body, and then the form, and that the form is what you would call the soul.
Mhm.
Or but the the form is just, for me, in my mind, the arrangement of uh, the matter that your body is made up of.
Mhm.
It sounds very physicalist to me, actually, your conception of the mind body.
Yeah. I guess the one difference then would be that I think that form's an active principle. So I don't think it's merely the arrangement of things. I think the form, especially when we're talking about human beings, um, because we have a capacity, an intellectual capacity that goes beyond what is physical. So, for example, like we're able to know universals, like we're able to know what the universal of dog is, rather than just this particular dog. Um, I think that that is a capacity that is not physically limited. So since we have a capacity, I think, that goes beyond a physical capacity, I think that our forms are capable of um, existing after or apart from the body. I think that's the only form that can do so. Um, However, I think the natural state of the form is in the body, and I also think that um, you would have to, as embodied creatures, like we get our knowledge from the senses. So you would have to be in a body really to perform all the functions that you normally perform, like I don't believe in like innate ideas or things like that. So I think that that this is one of the reasons why I think the resurrection makes a lot of sense, because um, if we were just ghosts floating around, then like how do we see anything? How do we do anything? Um, but um, if we are back in physical bodies, then that makes like that's how we naturally naturally operate. But I might be wrong about that. I don't know. That's just what
Uh,
I believe right now.
I understand, but how do you draw the line between this conception of the mind-body relationship and the resurrection? I didn't quite understand that. Could you get into more detail about that?
Sure. Yeah. What I was saying is that the idea that we are matter form composites, I think, makes more sense on the idea of the resurrection. The fact that we are going to be resurrected bodies, then it makes sense if we were just souls using bodies.
Mm. Mm.
Because if we were souls using bodies, then why not just stay in a ghostly heaven?
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, okay. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Christian
Oh yeah, sorry.
philosophy, so
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of feel out of my depth now. But yeah, that makes sense. Don't want to take too much more of your time, but maybe could you just point my viewers to what you do? You have a website.
Yeah, my website is the Philosopher, like PHILO, and then surfer, like as in
Mhm,
surfing.com.
mhm,
And or you can find me at Chico the Philosopher on YouTube.
mhm.
And
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you so much for the interview today. Uh,
yeah, Chris, it was really nice to meet you, man. Thank you very much.
yeah, same. And I love your stuff. I mean, I watched some videos. I got to know more about your YouTube channel once I saw this one video, and really interesting stuff. So yeah, maybe one day we can speak again.
Yeah, I would love that, Chris. All
Yeah,
right. It was great to meet you, man.
great. Yeah, you too. Have a nice day.
Okay.
Bye bye.
You too.
See you.
Bye.